So we're still on page 142. We're in the check your understanding box, looking at number 6. So we're going to consider this equation. X squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. So you're going to help me solve this one. So first we're going to use the quadratic formula, and then we're going to look and see, was it possible for us to factor this quadratic? So there are multiple methods to solving quadratics, and you should have kind of a tool belt full of them. There's factoring, quadratic formula, completing the square. It's just solving for x by taking square roots. We now know different ways to solve quadratics. So let's start with the quadratic formula. So first thing we need to do is identify the a, the b, and the c from this equation. So it is x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. Remember, a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is your constant. So identify a. Identify b. Identify c. So a, even though there's not a number in front of that x squared, we know there's an understood 1, a placeholder of 1. In front of the x is a negative 6, and then the constant is 7. So a1, b negative 6, c 7. So now we can take those values and just plug it into the formula. Again, this is another method of solving. So we have negative and then our b value. Or if you just remember it is the opposite of b, then I could just put, instead of putting negative 6, I could just put positive 6, because the opposite of a negative would be a positive. But I'm just going to leave it as negative 6 for right now. Then plus or minus the square root of your b squared. Again, put all of these in parentheses. It'll help you if you do decide to type in the calculator. So b squared minus 4ac. All of this is being divided by 2 times our a. So now let's simplify. So let's start with what's underneath the square root. So that plus or minus. So underneath the square root, we have negative 6 squared, so that's 36. And then minus 4 times 1, so it's negative 4. And then times a 7, so that is negative 28. Okay, other parts of our quadratic formula right here, we have negative 6, or like we talked about earlier, it's just positive 6. And our denominator is 2 times 1, or just 2. So let's simplify more. Let's look again what's underneath that square root. What is 36 minus 28? So we now have 6 plus or minus the square root. 36 minus 28 is an 8, all over 2. So let's look at that square root. Let's look at the square root of 8. Well, remember, you can just take 8 and list the factors. We only care about the factors that are perfect squares. Well, there's not many factors of 8. It's just 1, 8, and 2, and 4. Of those, which of those numbers are perfect squares? Meaning if you take the square root of them, you will get a whole number, such as 1 and 4. So 4 is obviously larger, so let's use the factor involving 4. So 8 is square root of 2 times square root of 4. Well, square root of 4, that's 2. Square root of 2 is just square root 2. So right here, I can rewrite this as 6 plus or minus 2 square root of 2 all over 2. Well, is there something that you notice that both of these numbers can be divided by? Like, can we divide both of these numbers by 2? Yes, we can. Right here, 6 divided by 2, that's 3. And then we have plus or minus. This 2 square root of 2 divided by 2, well, again, the 2's would just cancel. So you'd have 1 square root of 2, or you can just put square root of 2. So right here, this is our x value. That means there are 2 answers. There's x equals 3 plus square root of 2, and x equals 3 minus square root of 2. So we don't really want the decimal approximation. This would be our answer. You can either write it 2 times, one with a plus, one with a minus, or you can write it once with a plus minus. So now let's look at factoring. Would it have been possible to factor this? Could we have done that? Could we have figured out what 2 numbers multiply to get 7 and add to get negative 6. So is it possible to factor? Well, notice if you list the factors of 7, which is 1 and 7, is there any way we can arrange those numbers so that we can multiply to get a 7, but add to get a negative 6? Let's try a few. Well, we know if we put positives here, like if you put positive 1, positive 7, positive 1, positive 7, it does not equal negative 6. Okay, so those didn't work. What if we made one of them a negative? Let's try the negative 1. Again, we don't get negative 6 or positive 7. Okay, so that definitely didn't work. So what about if we made all of them negative? So it works for the top, it doesn't work for the bottom because we get a negative 8. Okay, I think the only one we haven't tried is what about if the 7 is negative but the 1 is positive? Okay, so it works for the bottom. We do add to get negative 6, but notice a positive times a negative does not give us a positive. So there is no combinations of numbers that multiply to get positive 7, add to get negative 6. So it's not possible to factor. We could not factor that. And we can also see that in the quadratic formula. Notice your final answer has that square root. There's no way we could have factored so that we have that square root. So let's look at one more example. This is probably one of the hardest problems that we'll do, so I'm going to solve it. You'll help me through some of the steps, and then you will practice with your Delta Math. So this problem's coming from page 143. I'm going to write it here at the bottom. So we're going to look at problem 7F. So we have 4x squared plus 3x equals negative 6. So we could do completing the square, but in this problem, I just want to stick with the quadratic formula. So first thing we need to do to use the quadratic formula, our equation needs to be in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Notice, is this equation right here that we're solving, is this equal to 0? No, it's not. It's obviously equal to negative 6. So we need to move that negative 6 over. So our equation is 4x squared plus 3x plus 6 equals 0. Now we can identify easily the a, the b, and the c. So what's the a value, the b value, and the c value? So a is 4, b is 3, c is 6. So we take those values and we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. So it's x equals the opposite of b, or negative b, however you want to write that, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2 times our a. So let's simplify the square root in different parts of our quadratic formula. So we have negative 3 plus or minus the square root. And let's look at what's underneath that square root. We have 3 squared, so 9. And then we have minus or negative 4 times 4, and then times 6. So if we do negative 4 times 4, that is a negative 16. This is negative 16 times 6, which would be a negative 96. So I put minus 96. And then everything's being divided by 2 times 4. Well, 2 times 4 is just 8. So let's keep simplifying. So again, our square root right here, we can write this as, so plus minus the square root of 9 minus 96 would be a negative 87. Okay, in the other parts of our equation, we still have that negative 3 in front. It's all being divided by 8. So you may be tempted to stop here, but remember, we've studied complex numbers. We know that this means there's an imaginary. So really, this answer is negative 3 plus or minus I square root of 87 over 8. That is our final. Now we are done. This represents 2 equations. 2 solutions to our equation.